Hi, Courtney. I'm so happy to have this opportunity. Any opportunity to talk about Machado is wonderful. And
I'm new to it, but I love it.
you see the fuss that you created with just one post?
I really can't believe it still.
I think Brazilians are eager to see some acknowledgement of how great Machado is. Perhaps that explains part of the big buzz that followed your words.
I think so. I mean, he should be up there with Shakespeare. I'm just shocked that I had not heard of him until I was doing this project.
Well, Harold Bloom said something similar. I don't know if he compared him to Shakespeare, but he said he was the greatest Black writer ever to be known.
Yeah, and with the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, I'm like, we need to find out about him. Like that would blow him up even more. Like that it's a Black author who's been overlooked and just he's the Western canon's just like not bothering with him. And
Yeah.
I keep thinking of all the books I read in college and high school. I'm like, they were not half as good as this. Why weren't they showing us Machado?
Well, but you're doing a great job in your world tour, and the letter B just gave you this shock. Listen, just out of curiosity, what's your ascendancy? Henning Novak is something. It's European, I suppose.
Let's see. Novak is my husband's name, so that's mostly Czech. And Henning would have been German, but I think
yes,
it was Hennig, and they changed it when they came to the United States.
I see. And I hear you resorted to literature in as means of healing yourself after a burnout. That's a wise move. Has it been working?
Oh yeah, it's been such a deep self-care. I just had the idea to do this project and it wouldn't leave me alone. And it's just every book, I'm like, I've learned so much and it just feels like such a gift to do this and to take the time to do it.
The most precious asset anyone can aspire for, time.
Yeah, we all get the same hours.
Courtney, I don't know if there's an equivalent in English, but in Brazilian bookshops now we have a shelf. I mean, some time now, a shelf that it's entitled self-help literature. And I always wonder whose self are we talking about? Perhaps the author's self bank account, perhaps.
Yeah, we have lots of self-help.
But good literature will always help any reader in one's quest for, I don't know, knowledge, wisdom. What is your quest?
For knowledge, or my quest is to listen to my muse. Do you have that word in Brazil?
Yes,
all right,
indeed.
from the Greeks. To listen to my muse and honor the my curiosity and to see where it goes and I don't know where I'm going to be when I get to the Z's. Like people keep asking for that complete list. I'm like, I'm on the C's now. I only know through the C's. And I'm also willing to change my mind on any of the books I read for the C's. And so it's just fun to open myself up to the adventure of it. But it's also
at the end, pardon me.
I just keep finding new things along the way. Like something I'm working through is, we call it imposter syndrome here. Feeling like I'm not qualified to have opinions about literature because I'm not a professor with a lot of degrees behind my name. And I didn't enjoy literature in college. I ended up majoring in history. And so I feel like this journey has been helping me heal that and reclaim my love of literature and my right to just be a bookworm with opinions.
Well, if you need any boost in your self-esteem, Brazilian readers and myself in particular, I must tell you that if you were an imposter. You've done it so well for such a long time. There's no imposter capable of that.
Brazil, I'm so glad it's like it was with the bees. You are the most loving part of the internet I've ever seen. I was in I did Bosnia, before Brazil, and the Balkans are spicy. We were joking about how I was starting another war over there because of the author I picked, and people are like, he's not Bosnian, he's Serbian. No, he's Croatian. And I was like, guys, I read a book from that part of the world, and I haven't read from that part of the world, and I'm trying to experience it. And just amount of hate, and you should stop, you should go get more educated. But then I got to Brazil and it was like, oh, this is just going to carry me through the project.
Probably the nationality of an author is determined by the language he writes, instead of the country he was born in.
Yeah, it's people told me you could spend your rest of your life studying this and you won't understand it. And we don't understand it here. Like nationality versus country versus race versus religion. There's just like, it's just a hot mess over there. And it's nothing like we have in the United States.
Yeah. Like Franz Kafka, he wrote in German, great German. He was Czech, he was Jewish. So what was him as an author? Kafka.
I am getting some flack about my pick I picked RUR, the play for Czechia. And people are like, why would you pick that? Like, it's like, because it's what I was interested in reading. I think reading should be, it's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about learning and enjoying and following where my curiosity goes. And someone else could do their own project and find completely different books.
When we try to stimulate youngsters to read, we have to prioritize the principle of pleasure as something that pleases them. Otherwise, we stuff them with classics and makes no sense.
Yeah, I love now that I'm like 45 and I have nothing to prove, when I can read a book and get 100 pages and be like, this book does not get my time anymore. This book doesn't get my headspace. Just because this was a New York Times bestseller or won the Pulitzer, if it doesn't capture me, that's something I loved so much about Machado, was it just reminded me how effervescent you can feel while reading a book, how a book that by someone who's been dead for over a century can make you feel so alive and so exuberant. There was just so much joy. I wish the whole world would experience the joy of Machado.
Through the voice of a dead man. Even more amazing. How did you arrive in Bras Cubas?
I wish I documented it while I was doing it, because then I would have remembered better if I knew how much it'd blow up. But for all the books, it would be, well, Brazil's a bigger country, so there were a lot of choices. So I would have been Googling things like, who are the most important authors in Brazil? Who are the most popular? And then I was reading a lot of just book descriptions, and Machado just jumped out at me. And I've been favoring female authors throughout the project because I know there's going to be a lot of countries where there's no female options, but there was just something about Machado. I was like, I've got to check this guy out. And then the posthumous memoirs was the one that really jumped out at me. I'm glad I read that one first, because I think I like Dom Casmurro better. It's like picking a favorite child, but Dom Casmurro just, I can't get over how many layers there are into that, and how much you can talk about it and not get bored with it.
It's endless. And at each new era, new decade, there's a renewed dialogue between the book and that time, that moment in time. And some people say that Dom Casmurro is a mirror facing the reader, which is, well, I agree with that. Listen, I want to go into Dom Casmurro, but first, What exactly blew your mind in Brás Cubas?
The language was so refreshing and it was just so unique and authentic. It was such an original voice. It was so funny, and it felt like he had just written it for me. And, like, I know he has no idea about this woman living in California over a century later, but it felt like, no, Machado was writing this book for me. It's so witty, the turns of phrases, the characters, it's just I mean, the way that he made this anti-hero who and they weren't writing many anti-heroes back then, I would think, but who just felt like this guy's such a scoundrel, but I love him and I'm rooting for him. He's doing everything wrong and he's despicable, but he's awesome. And I wish he was alive and he makes these fictional characters just come to life.
Reading Machado, once in a while, you have to stop just to have that private laugh with oneself, like, because it's so funny and it's such a sophisticated humor, at the same time so accessible. So
And he didn't make me feel dumb. He has so many things going on where I was like, "Oh, I wish I'd read that author or this French author or this, this old author." But it doesn't I don't feel dumb doing it. I'm sometimes Googling like, "Oh, what did this author have to say about this?" But it was a book that made me feel smarter while reading it. He does it in a way he's not condescending. It didn't feel like he was showing off. Um, I remember I did read in one of the pieces about Bras Cubas that he went back and he did edit out some of the references because he didn't want to be showing off. And I love that. Like he's being his brilliant self, but he's not there to be like, "Hey, look at me, look how much smarter I am than you." And the more I read them and the more I people are sending me their ideas about the books, the more I'm like, wow, this is a genius. Like we throw around the word genius pretty casually, but no, he was a genius.
indeed, you got it. You got it. Because it's not like ironic humor, like I'm laughing at them. It's let's laugh alone about our own misery or glory, whatever. Listen, one of the puzzling things about Machado, I don't know if you know that, he was an excellent writer, but he was romantic and he wrote several romances. And then he had some kind of illness, not it's not clear. And then he went up to the mountains for a bit more than 3 months. When he comes back, it's a whole new author. He writes Brás Cubas, then Casmurro, then Quincas Borba, which is all of them are modern, no longer romantic. So he was modern before modernism.
Mhm.
Who else would you quote as premature as avant la lettre modernists?
Well, I don't know. I'd have to think about that. It was hard to think of who his contemporaries were because it really felt like he was writing in the 21st century. Like, oh, this is some book that Oprah picked for her book club a couple of years ago that I just found out about. I I kept flipping back to see the publication date. It felt like he on the one hand could have been a contemporary and friends with Shakespeare and inventing all these just ways to tell a story and to build characters who are so original and fresh. But on the other hand, he's just up there with all the great current authors that were, told
Yeah.
like the best authors. But, like Jane Austen was always my favorite author until I read this. And then like halfway through, I'm like, I'm sorry, Jane, you're gonna have to go down the place.
Well, we'll always have Jane
Yeah,
Austen over there.
yeah.
I think Kafka perhaps is one of those premature modernists. The way he related to the writer, Machado has that. He's always present, talking to the writer. I'm writing that to you. This is a kind of a new. What would you point any kind of equivalent to Machado in America, an American Machado or American Brás Cubas or Dom Casmurro?
Don't I'm still thinking that over. Because I know that we're told, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, those are the people we studied in school. My 11th grade teacher was obsessed with The Great Gatsby. And I feel like I need to reread those because now I'm thinking, gosh, those just don't seem any like to hold a candle to Bras Cubas. I mean, I did think about Oscar Wilde while reading this and thinking he's got that wit, but he outshines Oscar Wilde to me. He just doesn't seem to have many peers.
Yeah, and I do have to agree. But listen, after Brás Cubas, Dom Casmurro's plot seems more tamed, if I can say that. It can even be read just as a melodrama. So what is a subversion of Casmurro?
How many the way that you use the word mirror, how I think it reflects whatever the reader is bringing to the book and whatever beliefs they have and their conceptions, it reflects it back on you because you could read through it and I can totally see the arguments for Capitu cheated. And then you could read through it and Capitu didn't cheat. But then there's a whole other layer of does it really matter if she cheated? And the whole idea of an unreliable narrator, which
For decades, Dom Casmurro was read and understood by its face value, meaning as if the narrator and the main character were not the same entity. So, how would you explain that? It was the reader's fault or the writer's skill?
I would think it was probably just the readers weren't ready to understand that they hadn't experienced anything with like such an unreliable narrator before. Because it felt like he seeded it with all the, references to Othello and, Iago, and it just felt very much like he's giving us all the cues and the arrows, but he's not, like, blatantly putting it out there. I find myself wondering, like, was he disappointed when he died? Like, "Oh, no one figured it out. I was too subtle," but, I would think that the readers just weren't prepared for that they hadn't read anything like that.
Well, for decades in Brazil, there was no question about that. It was a story of a woman who cheated. And then there was an American critic that was the first one. She was the first one to write the Brazilian Iago, no, the Brazilian Othello was a book.
Mhm.
And that she said, listen, the guy is telling his story. And she points out to the name, Santiago. There's Iago in Santiago.
Yeah,
So it's, yeah, he's full of, there's,
little hints and
uh,
little breadcrumbs.
um, what would you say it is the main subject of Don Casmurro? Jealousy, adultery, or repressed homo affection?
Jealousy, what was the second one?
Adultery.
Okay. The one that I'm thinking about is actually someone sent me a message today, and they were describing how they think it's about remorse and how he's writing this from this position in life where he's been separated with Capitu and he hasn't known his son at all and he probably has all these regrets for the way he let his jealousy consume him. I definitely think it's a book about jealousy. But also like narcissism. It seemed like he was everything's about him and just like his mother being a little cool towards him can be just blown into like into a fiasco or just like into a crisis of like what's wrong, what's Capitu doing, what am I doing. um I think what's great about the book is that you couldn't just pick one theme. I don't know about the I'm really undecided on the Escobar, on the
You
on
think
the
he was jealous? Bentinho was more jealous of Capitu or of Escobar?
oh I think he was probably more jealous of Escobar than I think it was almost like he wanted to keep Copy 2 in like a museum case and keep her like all to himself, and he couldn't stand her going out into the world and going to a ball and dancing with someone else, and just got eaten up by the jealousy. But yeah, it's like it's one of those things where I start to talk about it, and then I'm like, wait, I could go completely the other direction with this. He really he created like just so many layers for us.
It's such a short book. It's it's really, it's not a long book, but it's endless. But listen, to put it in traditional, conventional terms, did Capitu cheat in you?
I would say no. I don't think she cheated. I think I just don't see it. I just saw so much jealousy and so many hints about Othello that I do love the people who say she didn't cheat, but she should have. That she's the phrase my husband likes is, "You got the grief without the gravy." Like, all the punishment, but for doing nothing wrong. Um, I didn't see that, but she could have cheated, and she would have I someone sent me an article by their professor who thinks it's sexist to think Copy 2 didn't cheat, that we're putting her on a pedestal, that as a woman, she has to be pure, and, uh, I wasn't fully convinced by the arguments. I'm like, "No, she's not pure, like, she's very vivacious and, like, has, a strong sense of character, and, like, she's very much like, you read Othello, you read a lot of Shakespeare's plays, and the women tend to be very shadowy figures, and, you never really like, who's Desdemona? Like, she's just some pretty girl who's supposedly virtuous and loves Othello, and that's all we know about her. But Copy 2, he really brought her to life, and, how she's almost sly and able to scheme and, um, yeah.
My internet was a bit shaky. I hope it's better now. I was about to, what was it? I just lost it. But anyway, I saw you had a query concerning what Escobar says on the eve of his death. It's translated, it's a great translation. Flora Thompson translation is great. But this was a tricky one. Tomorrow the sea will be quite a challenge for us, says Escobar. And then you said, what does he mean by us? Did anyone answer you about
Oh,
that?
yeah. I got, full grammar lessons. It wasn't, I've learned so much about I know more about Portuguese grammar now than English. Florence didn't do this translation of Dom. She did, posthumous memoirs, but she hasn't done Dom Casmurro yet.
Whose translation is Don Casmurro?
I read Margaret Jill Costa and Robin Patterson, and
I see.
I'd actually bought a different version, and someone told me, "No, this is the one from 2023." So I was like, "Fine, let's try the newest one." But like, I
Well,
understand that it meant like a general we, like just talking about how like if anyone
yeah,
happened to go into the sea that day.
uh, yeah. We guys are going to
Yeah.
challenge to see something like this, and it's quite colloquial. Instead of saying we say a gente. The people, the people meaning we, a gente. Uh, it's funny because when you have to translate, you see uh, how crazy it's the idea. Any other thoughts you would like to share on Don Casmurro?
Oh, I could talk about it all day. Just all the layers. People pointing I have to reread it again and probably pretty soon because it's just like once you get to the end, it's like, wait, what did I miss from the first go around? I was definitely very primed to believe that Copy 2 didn't cheat because people had alerted me to that before. And like, and so I read Othello before I read this book, and so having Othello so alive in my mind really helped convince me, like, that's what he was going after. It's sort of like the idea that you don't put a gun in the beginning of the story unless the gun's going to go off at some point. And this felt like, I don't think you keep talking about Othello if the woman's actually out there cheating. And it's why I keep wondering about Escobar drowning. I'm like, he didn't put really much in there for us to figure that out, but it seems sort of anticlimactic for him to just drown when we have Capitu's eyes. Oh, that's something I love, is how they use the word undertow, and that would be like a strong current that's going in the opposite direction of the current on the top of the water. And I've heard that, but also hangover eyes was used.
Yeah, the word, it's a very soundful word in Portuguese, is ressaca, which means a sea storm.
Okay.
It's the way the sea behaves when there's a big swell. It's a ressaca. But the ressaca, as it comes with strong waves, the backflow is very powerful as well. So in that way, eyes would drown, would pull one's inside and drown. The point is that he says that she has olhos de ressaca, ressaca eyes, and then Escobar dies in a ressaca. And that's is one thing that amazes me. It's when someone dies in a brave sea like that, in a stormy sea like this, the body is not immediately rescued. Sometimes it takes days, and his death is like the enslaved guy that comes and says, "Senor was swimming. Senor has died." 2 sentences, really. But that's the way Machado writes. I mean, he goes to the seminar, Bentinho. It doesn't tell us much about the seminar. It's just that wonderful sequences of the lady that falls in the street and he goes crazy as a theme. That's so funny, so incredible.
There's so many, like, just fun little details, and how he covers a whole life so well, but and knows the episodes, like, how he spends so much time in the beginning, and then, like, towards the end, he's like, "Okay, we're gonna have to, like, rush through this last bit," but it also didn't feel rushed, like, it felt like, inevitable, and, like, he built it up, like, it's just such good storytelling.
Listen, Susan Sontag, Allen Ginsberg, Harold Bloom, Salman Rushdie, all of them reputed Machado as a genius. Nevertheless, Brazilians are often perplexed by the fact that Machado is not widely and universally recognized as one of the greatest of all times. What would explain this? Just the fact that he was Portuguese?
I don't know if it's that it's Portuguese or that it's, well, it could be. I mean, you do have the entry barrier of it not being in English, and then not being one of those predominant Western European languages right now. But yeah, it could be the Portuguese, it could be that he was Black, um, and was the grandson of slaves, and that you would have had, like, when people should have been pushing his work, you probably had even more racism than you would have to deal with today. So I
But
don't.
the funny thing that during Machado times, he was not seen socially as a black person. He was seen as a white writer. So
Was that
um,
because you wouldn't have had, like, the internet or photographs or stuff, so people would just be seeing his names in the
no,
newspapers?
no, because he was not very black, his skin, he was mulatto, and because he ascended socially, and social ascendancy sort of blurred racial differences. in that society, in the Brazilian society. It's a different kind of racism that Brazil has gone through than the States. In Brazil was always like, pretend we are not racist. On the contrary, it's the States, they institutionalized racism. And well, that's another conversation. I would love to see you again, Courtney. I think you should think seriously about coming to see Machado's birthplace.
I think I have to at this point.
You will. You do have to come, please. We'll arrange for you to have a beautiful welcome in Rio. And no Machado. You know, the Machado's house has been demolished, unfortunately. There's a building block. My son lives in this very building block where that was built over his house. Yeah, but you can see the neighborhoods. You still can find some, and to know the Brazilian Academy that he founded. He was the founder, first president.
Yeah, I hope that the US doesn't keep neglecting South American literature and culture. I do think, going back to your earlier questions, I think it's just a lot of South America has been neglected. And it's almost as if they're like, all right, we have Isabel Allende and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. That's enough. And because, if you're learning in the US schools, it's basically the United States and then some European, because, we're a colony of England. So there's still that fascination, but it's just this whole neglect of the rest of the world. And it's like we have to stop being so US centric. Just because we're the center of a lot of media, it doesn't mean we can't look beyond our borders.
We we would all enrich ourselves with this exchange.
Yeah, I think
Thank you. Thank you very much for the role you are playing in this process. Very important. Thank you so much.
It's been Brazil is just wonderful. Part of the Machado love is definitely the love and enthusiasm of Brazilians.